I have knelt once in my life, not to a conqueror, not to a god, not to the memory of my father, who was harder than the stone beneath Thornwall and expected the same from me. I knelt to a woman standing alone in the center of my feast hall, pushed there by a man who thought he was being clever, while 200 wolves watched to see what she would do. I am still not certain she knows what she cost me that night or what she gave me, but I have told this story to no one, and I find, now, that I want it recorded, not as a king's proclamation, as the truth of a man who almost let the wrong thing happen in his own hall, and didn't. Lord Fenwick arrived at Thornwall on the first night of the midwinter feast, 3 years into my reign. He governed the southern border holds. Not well, but quietly enough that I had not yet had reason to act. He brought 12 of his wolves, a great deal of wine he had not been asked to bring, and a particular kind of smile I had learned to recognize in council, the smile of a man who has already decided how the evening will go. I had not decided anything. I sat at the high table and let the hall fill with heat and noise and the smell of wood smoke and roasted meat, and I watched. That is mostly what I do at feasts. My wolf had been restless since sundown, not uneasy, not alarmed, but alert in a way I could not account for. I had scanned the doors, I had scanned the wolves. I found nothing that explained the feeling, so I set it aside and watched Fenwick instead. He worked the hall the way he worked a negotiation, carefully, from the edges in. He spoke to the pack's elder hunters. He laughed at things that were not quite funny. He poured wine for men who had not asked for it. And then, perhaps an hour into the meal, he leaned toward the young wolf at his elbow. One of my own pack, I noted, a hunter named Breck who had always wanted to be thought of as someone, and said something behind his hand. I did not hear it. I saw the result. Breck crossed the hall to where the Omegas sat at the far end of the long bench, the ones without rank, without formal place at the feast, present because I had stopped my predecessor's practice of excluding them entirely. He stopped behind a young woman I had seen perhaps twice at a distance, neither time close enough to read her face. He said something to her. She went still for a moment in a way that was not surprise, but something older than surprise. The stillness of a person who has been here before, in one form or another, and knows the shape of what is coming. She stood. She walked to the center of the hall. I do not know what Fenwick expected. Perhaps some fumbling, some redness, some small humiliation he could watch and carry back to the south as a story about the roughness of northern halls, the kind of cruelty that hides behind a laugh that can be waved away afterward as only a bit of fun. She had been told to sing, I learned later, told that the hall wished to hear her, which was not the same as being true. She stood in the center of the floor and looked at the room. I will tell you what I saw in that moment. Nothing broken. A woman with no rank and no protection, standing in a pool of torchlight while 200 wolves waited to be entertained at her expense, and there was nothing in her face that begged them to be kind. She was not performing courage. She was simply herself, clear-eyed, entirely present, as if the hall around her were weather, and she had long since learned to stand in weather. My wolf went so still inside me that it felt like absence. And then not absence, presence, a very specific, very quiet presence, the way a held breath precedes a name. I did not understand it yet, she began to sing. I am not a man who is moved easily by music. My hall has had good singers. I have nodded, and eaten, and been vaguely pleased, and moved on. This was not that. The voice that came out of her was not trained. It was not meant to fill a hall or demonstrate a technique. It was simply what it was, clear and unhurried, like cold water finding its level. A northern lament, one of the old ones, the kind that was sung at midwinter before the moon turned. She sang it without flourish. She sang it as though she were alone. The laughter that had been building around the edges of the room, the anticipatory laughter of people waiting to be given permission, dissolved. Not politely, not because it was suppressed. It dissolved the way morning mist dissolves, not pushed out but replaced, quietly, by something that left no room for it. I heard Fenwick shift in his seat. I was already standing. I am not certain when I made the decision. I am not certain it was a decision. My wolf, which had gone still, was now entirely focused, the way a wolf focuses when it has found what it has been looking for and stops all the searching that has worn it through months and years. There was a recognition happening inside me that I could not have articulated in that moment and would spend the next 3 days trying to name. What I knew, she should not be standing alone in that floor. And I was the reason she was safe or not safe in my hall, and she was not safe, and I was on my feet, and the choice that followed was the only one I was capable of making. I walked down from the high table. The hall noticed. Halls always notice when the Alpha King moves. The talking stopped in a wave, outward from me, until the only sound was the fire and her voice, and then her voice stopped, because she had heard the silence and opened her eyes and found me walking toward her across the open floor. She looked at me the way she had looked at the hall, without flinching, with that same clear, level quality, as though she were taking an honest measure of whatever came next, and would not pretend it was something it wasn't. I stopped in front of her. I have a voice that carries in a hall without effort. I did not raise it, I knelt, one knee to the stone floor of Thornwall, in front of an Omega with no rank, at a feast attended by half my pack's hunters, and every one of Fenwick's wolves. I heard something move through the room, not sound, but the particular absence of sound that happens when 200 people stop breathing at the same time. I looked up at her. She was looking down at me with an expression I could not entirely read. Not triumph, something quieter, something that recognized what the kneel had cost me and did not dismiss it. I said, "Kneel, she is your queen." Not a question, not an invitation. The hall heard it as what it was, a naming. There was a moment, half a breath, maybe less, and then the sound of knees meeting stone began, one after another, moving outward from where we stood like a tide going out. 200 wolves. My hunters, my elder council, the young wolves near the door who had been told to laugh by the man at Fenwick's table. Fenwick did not kneel. He stood in the middle of that kneeling hall, wine cup in hand, with the smile still on his face. The reflexive smile that had not yet caught up to the room. He was still there when everyone else had settled, a single standing figure in a sea of bent heads. I let him stand. There is a particular kind of consequence that does not require my voice. I stood. I held out my hand to her. She looked at my hand for a moment. Then she looked at my face, and I understood that she was deciding, genuinely deciding, not performing hesitation, not calculating, but standing in a real question the way she had stood in the center of my hall. Honestly and without pretense, she said, "All right, 2 words. The simplest possible answer. I have heard oaths sworn with more ceremony that meant less." She put her hand in mine. The bond that had been building in me all evening, the stillness, the recognition, the name that had been looking for its sound, flared fully then, not painful, not violent, but complete, the way a fire completes itself when given air. I felt it in my chest, in my wrist where the mate mark was rising in gold against my skin, and I saw by the way she briefly closed her eyes that she felt it too. Fenwick left Thornwall before dawn. I did not detain him. His position at the southern border was reviewed in the following month by my council, which found upon reflection that the hold could be better governed. I have heard he does not smile the same way anymore. I find I rarely think about him. What I think about on the cold mornings when I wake before the fire has been rebuilt is this: the way she looked at that hall without begging it to be kind, the way her voice filled a room she had not asked to stand in, the way she looked at my hand before she took it, honestly, without performance, deciding. She has been in this hall 1,000 times since. She stands in it differently now, and the hall knows the difference. But what I return to is not the kneeling of 200 wolves, or the gold of the mate mark, or even the sound of her voice in the silence Fenwick made. It is the 2 words. All right, as though the whole of what followed, the hall, the pack, the bond, the long years ahead of us, was simply something she was willing to try, because she had decided I was worth the deciding. She was correct. I have spent every day since trying to deserve it.